It all started on a warm Saturday afternoon, the kind of day when the smell of grilled meat just belongs in the air. I had been running my little barbecue restaurant for about a year at that point, and we'd started to get a real following. We weren't a huge operation, just a converted corner lot with some outdoor tables, a smoker that could make angels cry with joy, and a steady stream of customers who came for the brisket, stayed for the ribs, and left telling their friends to come back with them next time. Business was good, and weekends were our busiest time. But then came that Saturday. We had live music playing, families eating, kids laughing, and the delicious haze of smoked hickory drifting down the street. I was behind the counter checking orders when I noticed a couple of men in uniforms making their way toward me. At first, I thought they were just there for lunch. Plenty of officers came by from time to time, and I always made sure they got an extra scoop of potato salad. But these guys weren't smiling. They were serious, clipped in their movements, and looking around like they were about to raid a meth lab instead of a barbecue joint. One of them asked if I was the owner. When I said yes, they told me they'd received a formal complaint about an illegal event taking place on the property. My stomach dropped. Illegal event. I asked what they meant. They explained that someone had reported that I was hosting a commercial gathering without proper authorization from the community association. My mind immediately went to the HOA. See, my restaurant wasn't in the middle of some sprawling business district. It was tucked into the edge of a mixed-use neighborhood that had been built in the early 2000s. Technically, my building had once been part of the HOA before it was rezoned for commercial use. The HOA had never been thrilled about having a restaurant on the border of their neighborhood. They didn't like the noise, or the traffic, or, honestly, probably just the fact that people were having fun without their permission. I told the officers that we were fully licensed, had the proper health and fire permits, and that this was just our normal weekend service. They checked my paperwork, asked a few more questions, and after about 10 minutes, it was clear they realized there was nothing illegal going on. But as they were leaving, one of them said quietly, "Off the record, you might want to watch your back. Whoever made the call seemed determined to shut you down." I didn't need a detective to figure out who that was. The HOA president, let's call her Linda, had been on my case since the day I put up the grand opening sign. She was one of those people who wore a permanent frown like it was part of her face. She'd sent letters claiming my smoker's aroma was a nuisance. She'd complained that the string lights in my outdoor seating area were offensive to the neighborhood aesthetic. She once even said my pulled pork sandwich was an affront to health-conscious citizens. I thought she was just a busybody with too much time on her hands. I was wrong, she was much worse. That evening, after the music ended and the last customer left, I found a bright yellow envelope taped to my door. It was an official-looking notice from the HOA claiming I was in violation of their community regulations, and demanding I cease all unauthorized commercial activities immediately. They gave me 7 days to comply or face fines of $500 per day. I laughed at first, because the HOA had no jurisdiction over my business. But then I realized, they were trying to create a paper trail to harass me into submission. Over the next week, it got uglier. They sent letters to the city zoning board claiming I was operating without the right permits. They filed noise complaints with the police every time I had live music. They even mailed flyers to nearby residents accusing me of lowering property values and attracting undesirable elements. And the wild part, some people actually believed them. At this point, I knew I couldn't just ignore them. I contacted a lawyer friend who specialized in property and business law. When I explained the situation, he shook his head and said, "This isn't just harassment, they're crossing into tortious interference with your business. And if they've been spreading false claims in writing, that's defamation." So we started gathering evidence. Every letter, every email, every bogus complaint, documented and filed. I even installed a couple of discreet security cameras in case they tried anything shady around the property. Sure enough, within 2 weeks, we caught a man removing one of my signs from the corner of the lot. Turns out, he was on the HOA board. That footage went straight into the evidence folder. When we finally served them with a formal notice of intent to sue, the reaction was priceless. Linda herself showed up at my restaurant, red-faced and sputtering, accusing me of attacking the community and ruining her reputation. I told her calmly that all I ever wanted was to run my business in peace, and that if she had left me alone, none of this would have happened. She stormed off, muttering about how the law is on her side. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. When the case went to court, the judge didn't just dismiss their ridiculous claims, he actually scolded the HOA for abusing their authority and targeting me without cause. Between the defamation, interference, and the documented harassment, they ended up owing me a hefty settlement, enough to cover my legal fees and then some. The board was forced to issue a public retraction of their accusations, and Linda. She was voted out at the next HOA election. After it was all over, I threw the biggest barbecue party our town had ever seen. Free brisket, live music, the works. The place was packed with happy customers, neighbors, even some of the officers who'd been sent to shut me down that first day. And every time I looked around at the smiling faces and smelled the hickory smoke drifting in the breeze, I felt that deep, satisfying warmth of someone who stood their ground and came out on top. The HOA thought they could intimidate me into closing up shop. Instead, they just made me stronger, and made my restaurant's story one that people still talk about today. Do you want me to also expand part 2 with the same storytelling style? Sure, here's an expanded, continuous 1,000-word narrative for part 2 of your story, keeping it flowing without headings. After that first court appearance, I thought things might cool down, but the HOA clearly had other plans. They were like a stubborn stain. No matter how much you scrub, it just spreads. A week after the cops showed up at my restaurant, a certified letter landed in my mailbox. I knew from the stiff, formal envelope that it wasn't a coupon book. Inside was a final warning, claiming my unauthorized commercial activity violated community bylaws, and that if I didn't shut down operations immediately, they'd pursue legal remedies. I almost laughed out loud. This was my livelihood, not a lemonade stand I set up on a whim. The HOA president, a man who dressed like he had a conference call with the IRS every morning, clearly didn't understand, or didn't care, that my barbecue restaurant was licensed, inspected, and operating legally. We weren't in the neighborhood. My restaurant was in a commercial zone just outside the community limits. The only crime I'd committed was having the nerve to be successful, which apparently clashed with his personal aesthetic for the neighborhood. It became obvious they were trying to choke me out through intimidation. That week, they started sending complaints to my suppliers, hinting that I was under investigation. A meat distributor called me, confused, asking if I was in legal trouble. I assured him I wasn't, but that call lit a fire under me. This wasn't just about me anymore, it was about the principle. If they could bully me, they could bully anyone. My lawyer, Carla, was a quiet but lethal type. She listened to my whole saga without interrupting, her pen moving in quick, neat strokes. When I finished, she adjusted her glasses and said, "All right, we'll play their game, but we'll play it better." We started gathering every shred of evidence. The letter they sent, the incident report from when the cops came, my business licenses, zoning maps, even testimonies from my customers. The more we dug, the more ridiculous their case looked. Then came the real gem, HOA meeting minutes, which are public record if you know where to look. Buried in the bureaucratic sludge was a conversation where the president explicitly said my smoke and smells were lowering property values, and that someone needed to send a message. Carla smiled when she read it. That's intent. And that's going to hurt them. We filed a lawsuit for harassment, defamation, and interference with business relations. The HOA's legal team, clearly not used to being on the defensive, sent back a dismissive response, claiming my suit was frivolous. Carla countered with a motion for expedited discovery, and the judge granted it. Suddenly, they were scrambling to hand over emails, phone records, and any communications related to me. What came back was like Christmas morning, if Christmas morning came with a side of vindication. We found an email chain between the HOA president and two board members where they openly discussed finding a loophole to get my restaurant shut down, even if it meant creative use of the rules. They talked about using police visits to scare off customers, contacting vendors to make them nervous, and staging a noise complaint with a neighbor who didn't even live close to me. When the first court date arrived, the HOA president walked in wearing the same smug expression he'd had when the cops showed up weeks earlier. That expression didn't last long. Carla methodically dismantled their defense, presenting each piece of evidence with the calm precision of a surgeon. She showed the zoning map that proved I wasn't under their jurisdiction. She showed the harassment timeline. And then she read the email where the president said, "We'll make it so unpleasant for him that he'll either sell or go under." The courtroom went so quiet you could have heard a brisket sizzle. The HOA's lawyer tried to argue that the emails were just personal opinions, but the judge wasn't buying it. "This is targeted harassment," she said, looking directly at the president. "And it's completely outside the scope of your authority." By the time the trial wrapped up, the HOA was ordered to pay damages for lost business revenue, legal fees, and emotional distress. It was a significant sum, enough to make them think twice before pulling this stunt on anyone else. But the real victory came when several homeowners, fed up with the board's antics, petitioned for a recall election. Within 2 months, the president was out, along with the other board members who'd backed his vendetta. In the weeks after, the atmosphere in the neighborhood shifted. People I barely knew came up to me, thanking me for standing my ground. A couple of them even admitted they'd been afraid to speak out against the HOA before because of how ruthless the board could be. My restaurant's business boomed, not just from locals, but from people who'd heard the story and wanted to show support. I started offering a Freedom Plate special, a sampler of ribs, brisket, and pulled pork, with a side of Sweet Victory. Looking back, I realized the whole ordeal could have broken me if I'd let it. The stress, the constant feeling of being watched, the fear of losing everything I'd built, it was real, and it was heavy. But sometimes standing up to a bully, even one with a gavel and a title, is the only way to stop them. Months later, I heard through the grapevine that the former president tried to run for a position on a different HOA board in another community. Let's just say his leadership record was not well received. Apparently, word travels fast when your downfall involves a barbecue joint and a courtroom grilling, pun absolutely intended. My takeaway from the whole mess: never underestimate how far some people will go to protect their imagined sense of control. And never underestimate how far you can go when you've had enough. The HOA thought they could make an example out of me, but in the end, I became the example for how to push back and win. And now, every time I fire up the smoker in the morning, I can't help but smile. The aroma that once lowered property values now drifts freely through the air, unbothered, untouchable, and just a little bit sweeter with the taste of justice. If you want, I can also give you a part 3 continuation where the HOA president faces personal consequences beyond losing the case, to really round out the revenge arc.